This podcast is part of the Blueberry Network. Blueberry.com is where listeners and podcasters come together. Check it out at blueberrywithnoease.com.
So the Earbud U podcast, while fun to put together, doesn't run for free. And while we're happy to be a new member of the Blueberry Network, we'd like you, our faithful listeners, to do something for us. If you're thinking about engaging with podcasting either now or in the future, and you're stuck on a hosting company, Blueberry is for you. Look, there are a lot of podcast distribution companies out there that are going to make you a lot of promises. But Blueberry offers three things that made it my go-to when starting the Earbud U podcast. Number one, convenience. With the PowerPress plugin and WordPress integration, it works with around 90% of all websites out there. Number two, optimization. Yeah, it took me a while to accept that Apple and iTunes pretty much rule the roost when it comes to podcast distribution. But after I came to that realization, Blueberry was great at making everything very, very easy. Number three, publishing and distribution is simple. Look, I have a lot of stuff going on in my life. I design corporate trainings, I give speeches, I write blog posts, and occasionally I get to see Mrs. Earbud U and the kids. But with Blueberry, publishing my podcast was done and over in 3 easy steps. No muss, no fuss, no bother. Look, head on over to blueberry.com, no ease, and type in the promo code earbud_u, and they'll give you a month of hosting service for free on me. You can't beat that deal with a stick. That's blueberry.com, no ease, and type in the promo code earbud_u. And now, on with the show. Lately, I've been obsessed with leadership and how competency in conflict engagement overlaps with all the things that we insist on not teaching our leaders to do. And a big area for all of us as peace-building professionals is the role of ruckus maker. Many peace builders pride themselves on getting intractable conflicts resolved, on guiding parties in conflict towards goals that they thought were unattainable, and even engaging in transformative, meaningful work. Yep, transformative work. But what if, though, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, what if, though, the entire field of peace building, and I include myself in that field, what if all of us individually and collectively as a field have been ultimately looking in exactly the wrong direction? And what if we've been doing it for so long that it looks like the right direction? Welcome to the show. This is Earbud U, Season 2, Episode number 7. Our guest today is Elizabeth Clemants. She's a shaman, a mediator, a peace builder, and an entrepreneur. Now, a couple of episodes ago, we talked with Danya Zimmerman, and this interview with Elizabeth feels a bit like a bookend, a bit like the same kind of interview, but just slightly, well, no, not slightly, very different. Transformative change is happening in the field of mediation at all levels, and it's happening in those areas that the field thought were rock solid and sacrosanct. But now, those rock solid and sacrosanct areas are being upended through the work of people like myself, Dave Hilton, Neil Denny, Elizabeth Clements, and on and on and on and on and on. And it's not all about the peace building, although a huge chunk of it is, but it's not all about that. Sometimes it's just about providing for your family, building a business that works for you, having a reputation as a thought leader, and yes, even a ruckus maker. And sometimes it's also about being able to sleep at night, knowing that you have done the best that you can to transform not only the world, but also to transform the people who want to go out and change the world. All right, that's it. Let's get into it. Welcome to Earbud U, Season 2, Episode number 7. Get your knowledge on through your earbuds. Our special guest for our show today is Elizabeth Clemants, serial entrepreneur and business owner in the peace-building space. Elizabeth comes from a long line of family business owners, and somewhere along the way, she became a shaman, a mediator, an adjunct law professor at Benjamin J. Cardozo School of Law in New York City, and a mediation trainer. She is a whirlwind of activity, and when I spoke to her in person, one of the many things that she said struck me as being valuable. And I quote from her directly, quote, "I come from a long line of family business owners, so when I see a need, I think immediately of a business I can launch to solve it." Welcome to Earbud U, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to have you. So, for the benefit of our listeners here, what is it that you do exactly?
Well, how long do we have? I have a lot of things that I do. Well, I sort of break up my work life into 4 distinct businesses, and one is I call Elizabeth Clements, and it's just my client work. And so I'm a mediator, I'm an educator, I coach people, and I'm a shaman. And that, I think of that business as just my direct practice. So I have 2 social work degrees, and I like direct practice. I like to be with the folks and do the work. So that is, in the way I conceive of my work life, that's one of my 4 areas that I work in. And then I have Planning Change, which is a training organization, and our mission is to educate and empower individuals to effect meaningful change through the thoughtful practice of conflict resolution in their own lives and the world around them. So we have all kinds of different trainings in Planning Change, some of which I teach and some of which other people teach. Everything from, full certification in mediation, certified by the New York State Unified Court System. We have negotiation training. We have restorative justice certification. We have mindfulness practice. We have corporate workshops, all kinds of things. Basically with the idea that if people knew how to resolve conflict around them in a more meaningful and powerful way, everything would change. And so We're trying to teach people that. That's Planning Change. And then I just opened Small Business Arbitration Center, which was my response to noticing that small business owners don't want to go to litigation and they don't want to go to mediation. And they don't want to go to litigation for obvious reasons, because it's too expensive and it takes too much time, and they just don't have those 2 things. And they don't want to go to mediation because they're afraid they're going to lose time and money and there's not going to be an end result. And they don't trust that the other person will come to a meaningful agreement with them. And so I saw that need, and I opened Small Business Arbitration Center, which is, a concept of mediation arbitration where people set up before they even begin how many mediation sessions, how much time with the arbitrator, how much it's going to cost, and then it becomes a locked-in, flat rate, time contracted process where at the end they'll settle everything they can, everything they can't will go to the arbitrator and be settled for them. And so in that way, I'm helping small businesses with the need for conflict resolution that they just don't have in the marketplace.
Right.
And then the last thing, sorry, this is a long explanation of what I do, but we have something called Hidden Water, which is our restorative justice response to families and victims of child sexual abuse. So I had a lot of people coming to my mediation practice and my shaman practice asking for help with a dysfunctional family system where child sexual abuse had occurred in the past. Now that child victim is an adult, but the family system never dealt with the devastating impact of the abuse. And so they didn't want to go to the criminal justice system, again, for obvious reasons, because they don't, our criminal justice system is set up to pit the perpetrator against the victim. The perpetrator has to deny and deflect and blame the victim and minimize and, make it somehow the victim's fault. And, families don't want to go through that. And they especially don't want to put their children on the stand for things like that. And so there really was no alternative for families who chose not to use the criminal justice system. But, a decade later or 2 decades later, the family is still suffering from having not had anywhere to go with this event, this devastating event in their lives. And so we developed a restorative justice response for those families. And so that's what we call Hidden Water, and that's our newest project that's just going to be launched this fall.
Wow, that is a lot of launching. That is a lot of
it is.
With all these things out here in the marketplace, and like I told you before we started talking, I want to construct this more as kind of a conversation, and so some things are going to strike me, and I'm going to sort of bring those up while we're talking. But one of the things that you mentioned, as you were talking about the various projects, whether you're working with small businesses or you're working in a restorative justice space. One of the things you consistently mentioned was, consistently mentioned a couple of things. First off, people not wanting to go through the criminal justice system or go through litigation, and you sort of offering an alternative to that process. But then you also talked about a trust deficit there. How have you seen that play out throughout your various businesses, throughout your various roles that you've acquired over time? Because that's one of the things that I argue is that there isn't an expertise deficit, and there isn't even a good application of solutions deficit. There's actually a trust deficit out there.
Right. You mean the clients don't trust the processes that are available to them? Is that what you mean?
It's the process. The process doesn't really trust the clients. It's innately adversarial.
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, in small business owners, I noticed don't trust mediation, and I understand why. There's so many mediators out there that are not really good at mediating, and they don't really understand mediation. And so I feel like we're having a backlash in our field, even though mediation has exploded in terms of training mediators. They're not trained well. And so what ends up happening is somebody tries mediation, has a bad experience, and then they blanket over all mediation, maybe even all ADR, and say, that doesn't work. I had a terrible experience. The mediator did this. The mediator judged me or blamed me or sided with the other side or didn't help us. We didn't get an agreement. And then, there's this sort of negative marketing going on by people who probably, have done a disservice to the field by not being well trained, right. And not having a thoughtful practice.
Do you think that it's a matter of not being well trained? I was actually just on the Southern California Mediation Association's website floating around today looking for something, and I saw a lot of trainings offered, and then I went to a couple of other trainers, attorney mediators websites. If I said some names, you would know who these people are, but I'm not in the business of naming names. And they were and they were offering trainings as well. And that seems to be the default setting for many mediation programs at the nonprofit level, is to offer trainings. But like you said, we've had an explosion of people who are trained. So,
right,
so how
they're not trained well. And here's where I draw this distinction is, I think there's more and more of this talk in our field, and I can certainly name names in the other direction, like people like Jack Hemmelstein and David Hoffman and Marvin Johnson, and there are people who understand that the training's got to go deeper, and there are, but I would say the vast majority of trainers have no idea what I'm talking about. But this actually comes from my shaman work, and I realized, and I've been a mediator now since '97, so I've been a mediator a long time. I started off just like everyone else. I thought it was a surface practice, like there's something wrong with the client, and I'm the expert trying to help them. But I think as mediation has grown, we've started to see that it's actually a spiritual practice of the mediator that's required, and that the mediator shows up in all their infinite unconsciousness, and they hurt the case, and they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. People still think, there are still people out there, mediators, who think it's about me helping get this resolution, rather than looking beneath the surface and saying it's actually about self-awareness or system awareness of the client and of myself. And so that there's something going wrong. The conflict is indicating a need for change, which is the name of my business, Planning Change. It's like the conflict is indicating nothing's wrong, just something needs to change, but we're not aware of what that is. And they're not aware of it, and the mediator's not aware of it. And so the paradigm shift that needs to take place in people who want to be in this profession is not taking place because it's not happening at the level of their training. And so nobody's even talking about that. They're telling them, okay, gather information, set the agenda, push for, agreement on these issues. I realize like I teach that too. That's the first step into the process. However, that is not good enough to go out and start mediating. And I think that, when I train mediators, it takes me all year to train them. I start in September. I don't end until May. And I meet with them every week. We work with actors, so you're not actually impacting any real clients the entire time you're practicing. And the cases get harder and harder and harder throughout the year. And I sit with my 4 trainees in each group, and I raise their awareness and I shift them. Most of the people come out of the training and they say, I went in wanting to be a mediator, but I came out having everything changed in my life. And so I do feel like there is something that we are missing in the mediator, that the training has to be longer. It has to be more profound. They shouldn't be with clients right away. I feel that I feel that more and more strongly every time I do a year-long training, and I see how much my trainees change over the year personally. Like their personal understanding of themselves changes.
Okay, but I'm not standing in favor or in disagreement with anything that you're saying. As a matter of fact, actually, personally, I agree with everything you're saying right now, because I do believe it is a spiritual process, both on the part of the mediator and on the part of the client. But you're going to have the pushback from people who are going to listen to this and who are going to be community dispute resolution folks, who are going to be running a CDRC, and who are going to say, yeah, but I don't have time to go deep with people. I can only give the standard 40-hour mediation practice, because there's so much of a need there for people to even bring parties to the table in the first place, and even get them to something, get them to a negotiated agreement around a divorce, or get them to
that's just not even the reality anymore. Not in New York. I mean, the community mediation centers have nothing if not a surplus of mediators and not enough cases for them to even work on. And so I don't think that used to be the reality. When I was running the community mediation center, we had 10 mediators, and I was mediating half the cases because I couldn't get the mediators to show up. I didn't have enough mediators. And that was once upon a time the case, where the demand, for mediators was higher than the supply. Now it is completely the opposite. There is nothing but the community mediation centers are overrun with mediators, and they don't have enough cases. So I actually think that I would like to see the community mediation centers push for longer, harder training instead of more people trained. And that those community cases where I used to mentor with community cases, I'd be training mediators, and I would step in and kick the mediators out of the room all the time, because my priority as the senior director of the mediation centers was the client. Like, the client wasn't going to get substandard service because my mediator wasn't trained well enough. And so I actually feel like, I have strong opinions from the outside now about community mediation centers, but they should be, there's no reason why they shouldn't be only giving those cases, the real cases, to the best and most seasoned mediators.
Right. Well, and one of the things that I see in the field is a lot of talk around this idea. Well, I'll go back up even further. You're talking about sort of Bernard Mayer radicality, right? You're talking.
Tell me what you mean. He says a lot of things. Bernie Mayer. Yeah.
I'm talking about beyond neutrality stuff, right? Talking about specifically about that book, which, as I've said before on other podcasts with other folks in my field that I've had the pleasure of interviewing, that book has hit like an atomic bomb, but nobody's really sort of, I don't think anyway, really sort of examined it. We're all still sort of kind of tiptoeing around it.
I don't think so. That book hit me hard, and I feel like I put it into practice. But I do think, there's this tendency, this inertia to just stay with the way we've always done it. And the field has to change as we evolve. And it doesn't. I mean, it does. Some people evolve and then others don't. But I feel like right now there is no reason why we should not demand much higher standards from our mediation trainings and from our mediators, and that we should, as a field, be saying we cannot be turning out someone with a 40-hour basic training, no practice, and they go out into the field and mediate a case subpar, skill level, and then have that client become the anti-advertisement for mediation. That there's no reason with this many people in the field why we should not just bump up the standard a lot. And then also what I love about Bernie Mayer's book and how it impacted me, and where you see me doing it in my work, is I think this is the point I took away from it, which is there's nothing but conflict in the world. There is just a huge supply. Nobody's, I was on a panel, people are like, oh, there's no cases. I'm like, give me a break. There's nothing but conflict. Human conflict is everywhere. But you have to develop a way that is appropriate to get into and help with the conflict. And so where I think most people are just following in the footsteps of what other people have done, what I think Bernie Mayer is saying is forget sitting by your phone waiting for it to ring and then calling the case in and sitting down at the table and doing it like the video shows you. It's like you have to respond to the conflict around you with a process that works. You don't have to do the basic mediation training process. You have to do a process that responds to conflict appropriately. And so, look at Hidden Water. Like I'm reaching into restorative justice to do that. Where, I did a MEAD-ARB model for a small business, which is a little different than others. You have to look at the conflict around you, and then match the process. You're a conflict resolver.
Right.
You got to use your creativity there. Yeah.
Well, you know what? I've done that in my own practice. I go a step further even than maybe you do, where I look at what we learned in the basic 40-hour training, and I didn't go through a basic 40-hour training. I went through a master's program, which was a lot more intensive. But even going through that, when I started my business, I had to step back and really look at what people in the market know about my field and about the skills in my field, what they think they know, and what do I have an opportunity to teach them?
Right.
In what period of time they're going to give me. So a lot of my clients are those very same small business owners you talk about, the distrust mediation. And they don't want a mediator coming into their businesses to mediate between Joe, who can't move his notebook off of his desk. They don't look at it that way. They look at it as Joe's a problem and you need to come in and fix Joe. Actually, I just had a client that was very much focused around that. And I didn't even use the language of mediation with them. I just used the skills with them.
Right on.
And taught them those skills and taught Joe those skills and sort of tried to move Joe and the organization and the business owner, well, I was business owner, the manager, in the direction of being able to fix, and not even fix things, but being able to really just sort of have that self-awareness, which I like that you use that self-awareness and the system awareness that the systems that they have in place are a problem, and that these are the things that need to change. And it's less about Joe not moving his piece of paper off the desk. It's more about these other issues which are baked into your organization.
Right, exactly. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, where I feel like most ADR folk are looking at the process they learned and how can they cram the client into their process, rather than what you're talking about, which is show up, listen to the client, ask them what they need, where are they in their own unconsciousness or awareness, and then start there and develop a process that actually suits their particular need, using your conflict resolution, of course, background, but molding it around the way the client needs to experience it or the way the client has access to it. And I don't think most conflict resolvers are doing that.
No, I would agree with that. And where I am really sort of coming down more and more on this is I think I have faith. I think conflict resolvers can do this, but I think it's, like you said, it's going to take a while. And I think the younger generation of conflict resolvers is looking for something deeper, and they want that other thing. Where I sort of, what I took from Mayer, and then we'll get back to my questions.
No worries.
No, this is good.
Yeah,
but
great.
What I got from Mayer was sometimes clients don't want a neutral.
Yeah,
sometimes,
right. They don't.
Sometimes advocate. They want someone to advocate for them. They want somebody to stand up and say, that other person is wrong and you're right, or you're wrong, quite frankly, and that other person is right, or whatever shades of gray there are in there.
Right.
And one of the things that I tell clients before I do work with them, and I'm very, very careful and very clear on this, I say, I don't do therapy, and I'm not a pastor or a priest. I don't hear confession, but I do help you gain awareness about what's going on inside of your own situation and inside of your situation with the other person. And the second I say that, I see clients' eyes go, oh, now I get this.
Right.
Now this makes sense. So now I can have a conversation with you about, or I can have a training with you about emotional intelligence.
Right. I mean, there's so many ways that we need to start with the client. So, I always think, 10 years ago we used to fight about, transformative versus evaluative versus, facilitative, right? And I just thought, that conversation is dead.
Right.
It's show up with what the client wants. First of all, hear what the client needs. Don't presume that what they need is transformative every time or evaluative every time. You may even switch in the middle of the session with them. That sometimes the client just needs to be listened to and reflected and left in their own juices to experience what's happening. And then sometimes, maybe in that exact same mediation, they need to hear what you think. And so it's got to evolve. We as conflict resolvers have to evolve into actually watching to see what the client needs and not just, one size fits all. This is what I learned, so this is what you get.
Right.
And I don't think that mediators are being trained to do that. And so, and even, I would even go further. It's not even about training them to do just that, but the mediator has to have such deep self-awareness of what's happening internally to even do that. And so that's where I feel like the training is really it's either falling down or it needs to grow deeper, is that we need to spend more time with mediators and having them do their internal work as part of their mediation training. And I see a distinct difference between the mediators that I train over a year and when I train, at the law schools for, 2 days. Obviously, but it's, it's like the
argument
takes long. It doesn't. You can't teach it in 40 hours in one shot. It takes time to evolve. It's the time between the apprenticeship sessions that the people are changing and shifting and understanding it in a different way. And so, I think what's interesting is, since I've been a mediator, master's degrees in conflict resolution have only come on, been available in the last 20 years. And
right.
I don't know a lot about master's programs, but there's an opportunity to go really deep. But I don't think most master's programs are teaching skill. But there's an opportunity in that 2 years to really have a deep, turn out really deep and thoughtful practitioners.
I will say that in my 2 years that I went through my program and I came out of ACU under Dr. Joey Cope, I will say that process, and I already went in with a certain mindset around self-awareness because of who I am and how I was raised and my background and the things that I bring to my own life narrative. But every single day that I did a piece of classwork, or every single day I did an exercise, or every single day I did a practice, clinical mediation or whatever, or every single day I worked with a group, I would turn around in my work practice, because I was working full-time at the same time, mm-hmm. I would turn around in my work practice and actually use that with real people.
Right, and then it changes you. It's like the depth of which you understand that information that perhaps you read in a book, when put into practice and then thought about, will shift the way you understand the conflict, conflict resolution in general.
Oh,
so,
yeah. Well,
yeah.
And I think
it's got to be a combination.
Well, and one of the things that I tell people, I had a person walk up to me the other day, and he asked me because he keyed on my background as a mediator. It was in a corporate training, and he came up to me and he wanted to talk to me about mediating a potential divorce between him and his wife. And I had to be very upfront with him. I said, I don't do mediations anymore, and primarily it's because I'm really focused on the skills training piece. I'm not an active mediator anymore. That's not something that I actively do. I've switched over much more to I want to get you to self-awareness about who you are and about why you got into the conflict in the first place.
Right. I mean, and really, mediators should be doing that too. But the training does not actually teach that.
No. Okay. Well, we sort of...
Yeah, we went off the rails, but that's totally good.
The rails for a little bit. Well, okay, let's talk about... And I'm not here to bash the field. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm here to actually talk about positive things. And one of the positive things that I like to see is there's more focus, I think, in the and more of a growing idea that there should be some business practice attached as one of the skills of mediation. And so you've built a lot of entrepreneurial peace-focused business projects. I mean, you walked us through your big ones that you've got. But how do you go from idea to implementation? A lot of folks listening are going to come out of master's programs, or they're going to be sort of people who are going to be sort of saying, well, I don't want to go get a law degree, or maybe I don't necessarily think that that's the only way to get a steady paying job. So talk to us about the entrepreneurial process from idea to implementation. How do you go from, hey, I see that need, to, hey, here's a business?
Yeah, that's, well, this is why I think the field is so exciting, actually, that right now the field is still just wide open. And there's nothing but conflict out there, and it's getting worse. And so I feel like the way in, for someone who has this kind of spirit, right, that we look into the world and we say, what kind of conflict is interesting to me? Like, what conflict out in the world, whether it's, the Middle Eastern conflicts, or it's domestic violence, or it's, business conflicts, or it's big corporate, conflict. It doesn't really matter to me. There's nothing but conflict out there. Just pick something that really lights you up, something that's really fascinating, has always been fascinating to you, because you want all that passion in it. And it's probably something you've been drawn to notice and perceive, and people in that world. And so I teach a class on how to build your ADR practice. And so these are some of the things that we talk about. But first, find that thing that's really interesting to you, that area of conflict that you want to work in. And find your passion, right? And then you go in and say, what's the need here that's not being met? And there almost always is one. And so it's not really about going in and saying, well, in this area of corporate, conflict, this is how people do it. No, go in and say, in the area of corporate conflict that I'm interested in, where is the unmet need? Mm-hmm. or how is the way people are responding to that need not working? And then from there, you build your business. From there, you come up with a creative response to the need that isn't being met. And, I can talk more about, the components then of building it. But I feel like that's the doorway in.
That's the doorway in, yeah. Do you walk through, and I'm not trying to step on your line here, but do you sort of walk people through sort of the sort of nuts and bolts of, this is your business plan, and this is what you should look at for finances and for operations and for management, and or not maybe management, but for marketing, and then this is your projections? I mean, do you do the whole sort of, I won't say MBA schmear, because I do know programs that are developing that are MAs or PhDs in conflict resolution that are starting to bring in those MBA components. But do you sort of walk them through that from your own lived practical experience? Or do you sort of say, hey, here's a list of resources like SCORE or the Small Business Association that can help you sort of walk through the more nuts and bolts things after we've gotten you past the basic philosophy?
Well, so we focus on 4 areas, and one of those areas is the infrastructure. Sorry, hold on a second.
No, it's okay.
All right, somebody's calling on my phone. So one of the areas, of course, is the infrastructure. All the things you're referring to, the website and the business plan and the finances and like that, the marketing. But the other 3 areas I think are probably more notable, and yeah, we do spend time on that. But one of them is the right attitude. And so I find that a lot of small businesses or entrepreneurs or people who want to go into it with the wrong attitude. They're like, this has to be done. They have a negative bent to the way they're seeing it, that they're not being positive. They don't call in abundance. They don't get excited. They actually have like sort of an edgy anger to it, that this isn't happening and this person didn't call me back, and why didn't that go through the way I wanted, and I haven't gotten a case in a week or whatever. Right. And so we talk about the right attitude, that you go into it with that sort of positive, confident energy and understand that it's a process that it builds. And then we talk about connections and networks. So nobody's getting this done by themselves. You're not going to sit in an office and create a meaningful business by yourself. And that you have to reach out into the world and into the community and make those contacts. And how do you do that? And, with what attitude do you do that? And then we talk about what I call the higher mind, which is, it probably isn't going to build as strongly if it's self-interested. So if the reason you're building the business is because you want to pay your mortgage, you want to make money, you want to be famous, you want to be well-known, that business is not going to have the same kind of power as a business that has the intention of changing the world in a positive way. And so there's really tapping into, not that I don't have to pay my bills, you have to pay your bills, we both have kids, that's a component of it, but that can't be the motivation. The motivation has to have a higher intention, I think, in conflict resolution to change the world toward a positive and meaningful way. And that when you can remind yourself that that's why you're doing it, that everyone will get behind you. And when everyone can feel that you're trying to close this deal or you're trying to make this thing happen because you want to make money or you want to be famous or you want to be well known or it's all about you, then you're going to start to whoop up a lot of negative energy around you, and people are going to talk about that. And so I can think of people in the field that are, their names are out there and they're doing big things and everyone talks about them. But just as many people come and say, oh, that person this, that person that. But it's because their higher mind intention is not intact. They don't remember that it's not for them that they're doing this. It's actually for the client. It's actually for the change in conflict in the world around them. And so, we talk about those 4 components when we're building our businesses. And so, yes, of course, the infrastructure, but there's a lot more to building a business, I think, in ADR than that.
Yeah. And I'm very focused on the infrastructure, particularly the marketing piece, because I love marketing.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by it. And my background, is in the creative fields. And so for me, that's where my creativity comes out. And so I get to sort of pump my creativity through the marketing piece and using the tools, and they are just tools, the shiny tools, like, social and all that kind of stuff, and doing fun stuff there. But the infrastructure piece for me is fascinating. But I absolutely agree with you about the higher mind and having the philosophical pieces in place first. I see a lot of work, and again, in the parallel field that I also do a lot of playing in marketing, where, and I won't say there's no marketing organizations that are out there to change the world. That would be a lie.
Right.
But I would say that I think they are few and far between. And the individuals there are individuals inside of the field of marketing who are seeking to push the field or push organizations towards that higher goal. But I would say that the vast majority of organizations in the world probably are really focused around those lower things, making the profit and that kind of stuff. And so those kinds of things can frustrate a mediator.
Right, and also I think it's, it can be frustrating, and the world around us is very, lower mind, me focused. How is this going to benefit me? How is this going to benefit my shareholders? But I actually think as conflict resolvers, our field is different. Like, that is
right.
Not our field. I mean, not that we don't want to make money and that we should make money and we need to make money in order to, propel the field forward. But the motivation of this field is not going to be me focused. It's not about just innately, the conflict resolution field is not about the mediator, and not
right.
about the arbitrator. It's not about the restorative justice practitioner or the trainer. It's right. not. It's about changing the people that you're serving. That it's a service-oriented business, with a higher-minded perspective on what are we trying to do. That's why people love this field. That they
right.
leave their legal practice after 30 years and they want to do something meaningful now. So they're going to be a mediator, and so it doesn't mean that we don't have to have the business behind it. We do. We have to have good marketing. We have to have good business plans. We have to have an eye on the infrastructure. But the infrastructure is not going to carry a business like this.
Right. I had a conversation with Neil Denny, and I don't know if you've heard that, but I did an interview with him.
I didn't.
this month. Yeah, part 1 and part 2 about that. And he approaches, and he's, out of the UK, collaborative law, really focused on, like you said, sort of the higher things. But he talks about conflict resolution as a set of skills, as a business leadership competency. And what do you think about that? Like, the managing the conflict process and managing managing the conflict process for a mediator with that higher mindset going into a business that may be very much quarterly focused. What are they going to offer that business? Well, they're going to potentially only offer the leadership competencies and then sort of try to pull the management or the group towards those higher things a little bit, or maybe push might be the better idea. But what do you think about that? Like, do you even think that that's possible, or is that something that you don't think we should focus on?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, I recently just this week read a study that said 45% of CEOs named conflict resolution as the number one competency that they needed more training in. And I think anyone who's running a business successfully knows, it takes the emotional intelligence of the leader. The leader has to get people, because a company is, maybe some companies, but most companies are not made up of robots. They're made up of human beings, and human beings get into conflict. And, human beings have discord, and human beings have resistance, and human beings can bring down a company if they're unhappy and the morale is low. And so I do think that there's 2 reasons why leaders need to be extremely competent in conflict resolution. One is that it will undermine their business if they don't resolve conflict as they go, because you can't expect a company to have no conflict. Of course it's going to have that, and you're going to have to be able to respond appropriately to it, or you will undermine your business without a doubt, or you'll be removed from your position. But the second reason why I think leaders need to be competent in conflict resolution is because the richness in the conflict of new ideas, if handled well, will bubble to the surface, and many companies are all about the next great idea. And it actually comes in the discord, it comes in the dissenting voice, that somebody's going to start to look at it differently, and that's where the new idea is going to come from. And so if leaders hate conflict and they just crush it or avoid it, they're going to miss the opportunity to mine those new ideas. And so I do think any leader that's really strong is going to understand that they need to be able to manage the conflict around them to even be a leader. I mean, I almost think that is what defines the leader, is that their competency in being able to manage the conflicts around them in a productive way. I have many people come through my training not because they want to be mediators, but because they are struggling with conflict as leaders in their own field. And so I have this one woman that I love to talk about who works at the Department of Health, and she very passionate about her field and hepatitis and the things that she cares about, but she could never push her program through. She could never get enough credibility with the people around her to advance in the way she wants. She went through the mediation training. It changed her. She got promoted immediately and then again, and she, got in charge of her whole project, and now she's really championing this thing she really cares about passionately, and she thinks it's because she started to show up at meetings differently, started listening differently, and started becoming that person who was resolving conflicts within their bureaucratic system. And so suddenly, before she knew it, she was being invited to meetings that didn't even have anything to do with her project because they needed a conflict resolver within the bureaucracy. Right. You talk about, like, you're going to go into a company with no trust and be let in and help resolve a conflict. Actually, the people that are already on the inside who know the content better than anyone who's worked in that field for 20 years, make them a mediator and then watch everything change. Because they already have the trust.
Oh yeah, I could spot in a room literally.
Right.
I could spot
who the
mediator is and I do. I have often walked up to people after a 2-hour-long workshop or a 4-hour-long workshop or sometimes even an 8-hour-long workshop. I've had them walk up to me and go, "Okay, you've given us all this stuff now. Like, how do you see me moving forward with this?" And I say, "You know what? You're the mediator in this group.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Let's get you moving on that." I mean, I've done that with churches. I've done that with nonprofit organizations. I've done that with small businesses and medium-sized corporations. So it's one of those things where like you said, the mediator, or not the mediator, but the trainer has to be in touch with themselves, so they're open to being able to see where those potential possibilities are.
Right, and also that they have to have that higher mindedness going in to say, it's not all about me, the trainer, who's going to get hired for the next job. It's actually me who is empowering other people in this room to do this work, and I'll move on to the next thing. That takes a certain higher mindedness, because really if you think just about how are you going to make money, then you don't want to appoint a mediator in the crowd. You want to be the mediator, because then you'll get the job again. But that's not actually what this field is about. Like, the higher mindedness is going in, teaching them to do it themselves, and then watch as everything shifts and changes around them. Yeah.
Clearly your shaman work has influenced you greatly, influenced you deeply. Now, I come from a Christian background, and I identify as being a Christian and blah blah blah, and all that. But I recognize there's lots of different other things going on out there. I'm not ignorant of that. And actually, some of the best classes I ever took in my grad school program were about not necessarily comparative religion, because we went way deeper than that, but just looking at all the different faith structures that influence mediation and can possibly influence mediation. Mm. So, yeah, not only at the mediation table, but even before people arrive there. So, because this is the reality of the world in which we live. Right. So, talk to me about how your practices in that space and your shamanistic practices in that space, because clearly they've influenced you. Yeah. How did you sort of fall into that, and then how did you sort of start to see those connections together?
Well, you mean how did I fall into being a shaman?
Yeah, how did that happen, and then how did you sort of go, okay, this links directly into conflict resolution stuff, which links directly into mediation, which links directly into...
Yeah, it's all connected, right, at the end of the day. Well, I mean, I didn't grow up in the East Coast. I grew up in the Midwest, in Minnesota, and when I was growing up, it's different now, but when I was growing up, everyone was Scandinavian or Native American. And so I've had a lot of that influence in my life throughout. And I think the most profound thing to note about indigenous cultures is that, and specifically the way shamans see things, is that the worldview is completely different. That we think, as the predominant culture in this country, that we're being victimized. That the bad things are happening to us. And, shaman and indigenous people don't see it that way. And that also... so shamans believe that anything that's hard and bad going on around you is manifesting from you, that you are the reason why those things are happening to you. And so they believe that through trauma and difficult experiences, shadow gets lodged in your system. They call that shadow. And that heavy energy, once lodged in your system, will continue to manifest around you. So if something happens early on that makes you feel betrayed, you will just keep re-experiencing and recreating betrayal circumstances around you everywhere you go. Either you'll see it that way because that's the lens you're looking through, or you'll actually manifest betrayal after betrayal after betrayal, for example. And so to a shaman, it's a very different orientation, because when you look at conflict, you don't say, why are those people out there doing that to me? You say, what in me needs to shift so that I stop seeing that around me? That is a very different way to look at it. And so from that place, I have built my training around eventually leading people to what I call the mastery of mediation, which is how can you actually impact the conflict around you by just shifting yourself internally. And that's all my shaman work. That's all that I learned from the shaman and then turned it into a mediation class. Because, just stole it right from the shaman and turned it into a class. But talk about building curriculum. But, it's such a different way to experience it. And so I take these people through mastery. It takes us 8 weeks. The first thing I do is say, name a major conflict in your life with someone you love, but someone you have a lot of conflict with. Okay, you're not ever going to talk to that person through this 8 weeks about the conflict, but you're going to examine it internally. And I have never had one person go through that training who at the end of 8 weeks did not say there was a significant change in their relationship with that person without ever addressing the conflict directly, just by addressing it internally. And so this is the work of the shaman, which is how can we take the shadow out of our system so that we see the world differently, and therefore we respond to the world differently, and therefore we change the world around us.
Awesome.
Yeah.
On that note, I want to thank you, Elizabeth, for coming on the Earbud U podcast. Is there anything that you would like to promote today? Any places where people can find you, social, websites, any trainings or stuff you got coming up, anything like that?
Yeah, so we have our basic mediation training, which is the start of our full certification for the year, starting on September 19th and 20th. And you can find all the information about all our trainings on planningchange.com. That's probably the main thing that I'd like to promote today.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. I appreciate
it. I appreciate it.
Podcast. We'll have to talk some more.
Yeah.
We only barely scratched the surface here.
Yes, we barely scratched the surface.
All right.